Everyone, let's continue with this panel on new technologies and their impact on the financial system. Reading the last digital banking report issue, I could see the transaction cost in the various channels. ATMs, in branches, $4. Sorry, ATM, $1. A teller at a branch, $4. Online banking, 1.2. Mobile banking, 1.1. That lies behind all changes in recent years, when many transactions were transferred from the branches to online banking or home banking and mobile banking. The good news it's a good news for bankers. In technology, we are innovative. In regulation as well. And this results in a lower cost. And we regulators try to convey that lowering cost to financial users. One of the things that we have approved in the board of directors, one of the measures, was to decide that every Argentine aged over 18 is entitled to a savings account and a debit card and electronic transfers free of charge, 24 hours a day, and immediate transactions. There are many products and services where this change has been. One of the main ones is the one on payment means. And that is this panel about payments to yourself, transferring among your own accounts, payments among people, payments to retailers, utility payments. That is the banking business segment where technological change has been more evident. This panel is very rich because it adds the views of various actors. The first speaker will be Lorenza Martínez Trigueros, General Director of Bank Systems, of Payment Systems, he corrects himself, of Banco de México, and she will contribute the regulatory view. Then Gilberto Caldart, President of MasterCard in Latin America and the Caribbean, will talk about his experience as an operator of one of the main payment networks in the world. Osvaldo Giménez, third, the CEO of Mercado Pago and Vice President of Mercado Libre. Mercado Pago is the largest online payment platform in Latin America, and he will provide his view about this. And finally, Julián Scopinaro, co-founder and CEO of Vinti, a platform for micropayments from cell phones. Each speaker will have 15 minutes for their presentations, and then there will be 10 minutes for questions. Lorenza, the floor is yours. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. And as Fernando was saying, it's a pleasure to be back in this Money and Banking Conference, coming back to these topics that are very useful for Argentina and for all of us here in the region. It's very productive to be part of this exchange of ideas and experiences that we share, because we share many challenges in the region. In the next few minutes, I will try to talk about two main topics. First, since we're talking about innovation in payment means, it is impossible not to talk about virtual assets or virtual coins, bitcoins. I think in this discussion we need to consider this. And it's interesting, after what we have seen in the previous panel, there was one question that was left there, And I'd like to make reference to that. Also, we will talk about the Mexican experience, taking as a starting point the development of payment means, the efficiency of these means of payment. We want transactions to be as invisible as possible, so that payment is not something that interferes in the transaction. These, as central bankers, our goal is to have these efficient means of payment, accessible, affordable means of payment that are safe, and in that sense, we are taking actions in terms of regulatory policy. New technologies, as has already been mentioned, provide new modes of payment, and this enables the development of new products. But there are also new expectations, higher expectations for users, as well as new ways to provide products and services by companies. This will imply new needs. Let's think about Uber. It is everything that this generates, not only the possibility of having these new means of payment, such as for Uber, for instance, but also this enables a new demand. And this Bitcoin appears here, as well as other virtual coins and currencies, and there is an alternative to serve these demands and to conduct international transfers or bank drafts. That's one of the main challenges, to do it at a lower cost. It seems that we may have these alternatives because it is a mechanism that can have a lower cost for users, and it may be free of charge for users. This was the expectation that we had some years ago. What has happened? Here, I will see Bitcoins to show you this development. In terms of the acceptance of Bitcoin as a means of payment, it is still very limited. You can see the chart. During 2015, there were 125,000 operations per day with Bitcoins, while in PayPal it was 12,723, and the credit card, as you can see, almost 400,000. There are many reasons why these payments have not been adopted so rapidly. One is volatility in price. It still has a high volatility, and some years ago it was twice as much as the volatility of gold, using a very volatile asset. Its volatility is 1.5 times the volatility of gold. There is also an issue with security, the cost of operations. Although it's not costly for users, it is expensive in terms of the infrastructure required, and the processing times remain very high. So what has happened? Where is the transaction in Bitcoin? What has changed with this is the use of Bitcoin chips. Although at the beginning there used to be heterogeneity, where the share of this virtual asset was limited, or at least it was used in the US and Europe with the dollar and the euro. In subsequent years, it has been focusing in China, especially for exchange operations. It's 97.6% of the transactions are with renminbi, and this reflects the way in which this Bitcoin is generated. It is something very similar. What is said here, I haven't found any hard data, but talking with those who participate in this market, It has basically concentrated or focused on transactions in gambling. It is a community of children who use this to buy Pokemons, for instance, virtual Pokemons. That is the main use that is being given. It is important here. Bitcoins do have these limitations. Expectations are no longer so high, but there is something that is transcending or going beyond, which is in technological innovation, the blockchain or distributed ledger. What we see here, and I would like to show it with two graphs. One is the percentage of investments. There is a large number of private capital funds and commercial banks that are investing in these technologies. At the beginning, it was a lot more important what companies related to Bitcoins or using Bitcoins were more important, while now it is only being used in distributed ledger or blockchain. In the first quarter, they accounted for 28% of investment, while the rest related to Bitcoin has been reduced significantly. Another way to see this change is the Google searches. What started to increase significantly was the search for Bitcoins. The maximum was reached in 2014, and what continues to grow are these terms, distributed ledger and blockchain. What do we expect from this? There is use of this technology. What this technology does is, instead of having a centralized record or register, this is a record that is copied among all participants. Participants are connected, and each has a copy of the history of transactions. And every time there is a transaction, the transaction has to be validated by all participants, not by all, sorry, she corrects herself, by a given number of participants. And once validated, it will follow this scheme. One of the advantages of this scheme is that it's relatively flexible. What they are doing is more development and pilot tests more than commercial use. But there are some applications that have this sort of interactive function, and they may connect the users, but also users with financial institutions. Financial institutions can be connected by users directly. A user can make a transfer to another user through his bank, and the bank will connect with other banks through these networks, and participants can go in directly. This point is important. And following with what was said before, the possible or the issuance of virtual coins, there are countries and central banks, especially the UK, is already working in developments of this nature. The bank does not necessarily have to provide virtual coins to all users. It may be a network involving the central bank and some intermediaries, and it is intermediaries that provide this virtual coin or currency and distribute it among users or retailers. The big difference here, and I think it's clear here, it's going to be difficult to draw a distinction between virtual money or electronic money in a card, what we use in a card, and this, which is virtual money. Virtual money, here we are changing one coin, or the currency from one to the other. It does go from one hand to the next. What we do with transactions with credit cards or electronic transactions is just a record, but it's not the same coin, while here we are talking about the same coin. This very much resembles the physical coin, while of course it has the advantage that you don't need both parties together to get to the coin. So what central banks are working at, and financial institutions as well, is that. And the most interesting about it is that at the beginning, it looked as something revolutionary and disruptive that would substitute existing institutions, while what you see now is a series of collaborations involving institutions, traditional financial institutions, and technology companies or new technology companies, to find the potential and the best possible uses of this technology. I am sure in a few years we will see something interesting in this regard, even in terms of central banks. This was just an introduction because I thought I would talk about payment innovation, and it was impossible not to mention this. To talk about innovations and regulation, I need to divide the type of innovation into two areas. If they use the existing infrastructures, such as credit card networks, or else systems, the current transfer systems, interbank transfers or drafts, sometimes operated by central banks. There is a large number of innovations in this field that I would like to mention that have a huge potential because they take advantage of an existing network. In payments, networks need to reach as many nodes as possible, and that's so very important, and that's difficult to achieve. But it is these infrastructures, some might be given by new technologies, but there have been many attempts to generate new networks, and in general, what has been seen is that these new attempts have ended up using existing networks. You must be familiar with Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, Facebook Pay. They said, well, I already have this network. It's easy to use it now for payment purposes. It's actually two different things. And although they have been successful and are growing, this is on using the existing network. So these new technology companies are providing the last mile to the user because they're more familiar with having a friendlier application that may be related to other services, but they are using the existing network. Okay. Well, I have 5 minutes left. Payments at global level have been used like this. There are many participants in the networks, and we have a large number of participating nodes, and in terms of devices, also we have an increase. This makes it a lot more efficient and also safer. And this can be seen together with increased substitution. We are only talking about transactions here. This is the number of transactions by means of payment without considering cash. This is just using new technologies or electronic payments as a replacement for checks. We can see that in developed countries, that is a sample of developed countries on the left. Checks in one decade went from 25% of payments to 7%, and cards from 43 to 61%. In emerging countries, it's interesting to see that this change has been faster. There has been like a leapfrogging, while checks have not been so efficient in emerging countries. So cards already involve 70% of these transactions. In the case of Mexico, we see something similar. And here I include the number of transactions through ATM, and it's interesting to see that starting in 2011, transactions with card have exceeded the number of withdrawals from ATMs, and the growth rate is much higher, both for transfers and for cards. So there is this substitution to electronic media, but it's taking place more slowly, as is the case of opposite to the case of our Nordic countries, although it's faster than other developed countries such as Germany, which is an economy that is highly based on cash.
Now, what type of measures have been taken in order not to replace cash, but to promote much more efficient payment systems, such as financial inclusiveness? E-payments are an entry to the financial system on a very first initial step, as Professor Townsend mentioned yesterday, to determine how we can make these steps much more efficiently. Let me share with you some of these measures. We determined different account levels so that we had bank accounts with transaction limits in order to mitigate risks, and also having easy ways of opening such accounts, all of which represents 20% of all the bank accounts now being held in my country and growing steadily in the course of time. Measure number 2, identifying requirements for aggregates. As Stefan Ingves has mentioned concerning different devices in order to make small businesses much more efficient and much more cost-effective. We have now Mexican terminals accounting for 20% of the overall network, high growth rate, and reaching out to small businesses, even to informal businesses. As Andy asked in the Q&A session, what happens in developing economies where crime rates are high and are creative incentives for cash payments? These small businesses in my country, Mexico, shows you how we have included all these aggregates in an emerging market economy, such as my country, with high rates of adoption. The benefits of using credit/debit cards imply reducing costs, and if they see, small businesses owners see that this is effective, they are going to participate much more. Another types of actions that we have taken, and I don't have time to enlarge on them, are connected with our latest experience in Mexico on how to use these networks in order to reduce costs when using these payment networks. In Mexico, card switching operations were in the hands of banks, and the entry requirements for these new payment systems were very complicated for new entrants. They were very costly indeed, high volume, so small participants were adversely affected. We changed this scenario in order to reduce costs and improve interoperability and entry to these payment networks. However, the number of terminals in international terms is still low in Mexico, as well as discount rates, which are relatively high. And let me share with you the card payment system. We have a network in place where we have leveraged on the existing card payment network, and on the other hand, we have developed the bank payment system in Mexico. The Bank of Mexico, the Central Bank of Mexico, has a system in place, an interbank system, a real-time interbank system in place, and we are moving towards a new system in order to reach out the public at large. The Central Bank of Mexico is in charge of keeping an eye on all these transactions as payments are concerned, and we are also developing transactions for the public at large, as I mentioned before. Here you can see how these actions have been taken so far in order to promote the use of e-payment networks. 80% of these transactions in this system pertain to the public at large, and we are using this network for mobile payments, and we operate on a 24/7 basis, as it happens in Sweden, and all Mexican banks are providing and offering this system through the central bank system, which has really enhanced the reduction of costs in terms of financial transactions, with a subsequent increase over the last years. In concluding, as regards regulation, you know that this is a very complex issue. We want to promote innovation in order to get advantages in terms of competitiveness, facilities, etc. But the risks are still the same, the ones we know in terms of financial, operational risks, and they are expressed in a different fashion. So regulation is very important so as to deal with all these risks. So far, the risk-based approach has been the following: risk assessment concerning services rather than corporate risk. Therefore, this allows us to enhance and promote technological innovation, and we are determining the limits of interoperability in order to facilitate a much more open access and entry to the system. Thank you very much.